I just want to say something that, for Jenny and I, this community...
Put it closer to your mouth.
This community is so incredible, and everyone knows Jenny and I went through a fire, and people rose to the occasion. Deborah Ramsey put together a GoFundMe, and I was kind of, oh my God, you know, it wouldn't have happened. So many things would have been so much more difficult for both of us if the community hadn't responded as it did. And I'm still so overwhelmed and thinking, sometimes I look and go, oh my God, oh, and what appropriate words, oh my God. Thank all of you, just thank you so much.
That's a good start.
Yeah,
it's a real good start.
Yeah.
I felt very fortunate because I was procrastinating and not getting ready to move out. And so this facilitated my moving out. But I didn't have to pack everything. And I didn't have to wash the rug and things like that. So I was sitting on the fortunate side saying, this is wonderful. But what the wonder is how the community came together and helped us. I think that was a big thing. Yeah. So thank you so much.
And my plan for a year and a half had been with a friend out of town was to get to India because I have 22 trunks at the go down by the debauches, and I just haven't been able to get to India. So I still have the ability that my plan is to go to India. Now I can do that. And I'm not getting an apartment right away because I want to go to India and not pay for an apartment at the same time. That was a question. I kept going, but Baba, how am I going to do this? Well, he took care of that. And with the help, I can go to India and I'll have the money to help look for a place when I get back. So thank all of you. Just thank you so much.
One of the, a group thank you is also in order for me. I just had a CT scan 6 months after I finished treatment for lymphoma, and it's 100% complete recovery. I also felt that everyone's prayers, that it was the most important for me to stay right here and go through the treatment right here in the midst of the Baba family, rather than fly to Denver or fly to California. And I really asked Baba to be my partner through this procedure and to call the shots. I'm not a medical person, nor am I head of the health food store. And when you're stage 4 and it's in the bone marrow, you don't have any time to do research. So I just said to Baba, I want you to be so close to me that I can feel you breathing down my neck. You got to be like right here. And I had just been through 3 years of cancer treatments for my husband. And I felt that Baba was leaving me unprotected. That yes, you have to go through it, Mimi, but you're going through it alone. And so I felt I had every right to say to Baba, look, buddy, you got to be right here. You have to be my husband, my partner, my medical advisor. You call the shots, I'll give you 100% of my effort, but you have to plan it. So just open one door. Various family members, my children, everybody had a plan. You know, you're coming to San Francisco, they have a lymphoma research department. You're going to Denver, they have a lymphoma research department. Various ones, Duke, Yale. And I was like, I cannot make that decision, Baba. You open one door and that's where I'll go. In the end, my insurance would only cover me in South Carolina. Oh. Unless my doctor said, we can't handle her, she's got to go to Denver, they've got the program. But in the end, my doctor was adamant, we got this. We got this. You can stay right here and do your treatment right here. The long side of this is that this is my family. And this is where I felt held up or bolstered by all of your prayers, people that put flowers on the tomb in India, that prayed for me wherever they are, Australia or India or whereabouts. But really, this was the place that gave me the support to go through what I've been through in this last year.
Thank you.
In 1986, I was living in my home in Staten Island. I had a Victorian mansion, a short walk from the ferry. And one day, seemingly like any other day at the time, I got an inner guidance, a call from Mayor Baba, call Delia. And I said, well, first of all, I knew right away he was talking about Delia de Leon. Not that I was on a basis of telephone calls with her, but I knew that's what he wanted. So I said, well, why Baba? Baba said, never mind, call Delia. I said, well, do you want to give me some kind of heads up about what it's about? He said, no, not at all. Call Delia. Very insistent. So I've been around Mayor Baba for a while, and I know that when I get that kind of call, it's no time to take it seriously. My heeding that kind of call in the past had saved my life a couple of times. So I finally figured out I got to better call Delia. So I made some inquiries and got Delia's phone number in England. And then I got the international operator to help me place the call. And it went right through to Delia. I said, hello, Delia. J. Baba. I said, this is a friend of yours. I met you years ago in New York City. I think I first met her at the Society of Avatar Mayor Baba, but I've met other places since then. She said, well, how did you know? I said, how did I know what? She said, well, today's my birthday. Oh. And Mayor Baba would call me every year on my birthday and just hang on the phone with me in silence. And you have made me very, very happy. She said, I know Mayor Baba contacted you to call me on this day of all days. And she was thrilled. I said, well, I'm very happy it worked out that way. I was just, you know, just doing what Baba bid me do. And about 6, 7 months later, she was gone.
Wow.
So describing this as sharing our mystical experiences is a little bit above my pay grade. But I did have an you know, when we read something that Baba has written, and we've only read it 1,000,000 times before, and then we read it that 1,000,001st time, and suddenly it's there, or something is there. I was reading the New Life, what Baba said in the poster about the New Life. And he said one of the parts of the New Life is that we believe in the lovers of God. And I never had seen that before. What does it mean to believe in the lovers of God? But what is happening today is believing in the lovers of God. And that is, for me, a mystical experience.
I'm very hesitant to share this, especially that it's on video. But I'm going to share it because I shared it first with Mara, but many years later, and many of you know that I was blessed to be able to spend many years over at Marabat in attempting to serve Baba. Meru asked me to share an experience with her. And I shared this, and at the end of it, at the beginning I said, I virtually never share this, that I've been taught to keep these things and ponder them in our own hearts. And at the end, after I told her, she said, Judy, it's really good that you, in all these years, have very rarely shared this. But now, it's important that you share it because it helps others. So, on Nehru's advice, 1986, good year. After 17 years of being with Baba, I finally made it to India. And one morning, at about 5 in the morning, I was staying in the Pilgrim Center, of course. Baba woke me and I felt him calling me up the hill, even though technically it was too early to leave Pilgrim Center. I went out the front gate and went across the road and started walking. I walked over the railroad tracks, and just after I crossed the railroad tracks, there's the road that comes after that, Baba appeared to me in physical form, as physical as this gentleman is next to me. And he took my left hand and walked me up the hill. And we walked up the hill in silence. And we walked, Mara was still in the body at that time, so there were no women's tomb shrines on the left side, or the right side of Baba's Samadhi at the time. And Baba walked me around the left side of the Samadhi over to Elizabeth's grave. And at that time, there was a beautiful small pipal tree that had branches that spread out left and right at about my height, so it was small. And he had me stand there right next to Elizabeth's grave, and he looked down so lovingly at Elizabeth's grave. And in a voice, I heard him speak. He was speaking audibly to me. And he said, "Elizabeth loves me so much." And it was as if it was the most touching thing in his entire existence, was Elizabeth's love for him. And then he leaned me against the outstretched arms of the tree, which I was going to need in a couple of minutes. And he said to me, "Let me love you." And I started shaking all over. And I said, "Baba, I'm afraid." And he said to me, "Don't be afraid. My lovers will take care of you." And I really literally needed the tree for support. I shook and shook and shook. A lot of time passed. And Baba's body that had been as corporal as yours eventually became like shimmering light. And after a while, that shimmering light went into one point and entered my forehead at the point of the third eye. And then I heard from within me Baba say, but I heard it, "You and I are not we, but one." And I was still shaking all over, legs, arms, head, everything, for a long time. By that time, after quite a while, eventually the shaking subsided, and I was directed inwardly to go down the hill and find a friend that Baba had sort of put into my life to be a support for me at that time. And I headed down the hill, and that person and Artie, the prayers and the artis had already finished, people were still singing. So a lot of it would have been like something like 7:30. So a lot of time had taken place there at Elizabeth's grave. And my friend, who always went to morning arti, was heading up the hill as I was halfway down, and so forth. But I've shared with you the most important part, which literally has given me my life's work, which I'm still doing, of trying. And as Bernard said, of when Baba asked him to do something very difficult at 15, that it would be hard, but he would try. I, in my own ways, find it hard yet to let Baba's love in, let him love me. But I'm trying, and I feel incredibly blessed that he walks with me and he talks with me.
What does he look like? What did he look like? And what does he sound like?
Okay, what he looked like, because we didn't have all the love personified, and all of those pictures of Baba were not available right then. When I made my first trip to Myrtle Beach, I went to the library and started looking through pictures to see what he looked like. He looked exactly like he did in 1938 in the photograph that Elizabeth took of him holding the goat. So he looks, that beautiful 1938 version of Baba. And his voice, a little bit like, I used to ask Khorshid, because she was, I think, the last person on the planet, certainly that I knew, who had heard Baba's voice. What was his voice like? And Khorshid used to look at me like I was crazy for asking her. It's like, she said, how can I explain what his voice was like? And I'm afraid I'm a little bit in that. It was beautiful. I know Mara said of Baba's voice that Buzz Connor's voice was the closest that she had heard to Baba's voice, and I'll go with her version. So that was my gift from Baba.
Beautiful.
Jai Baba.
I read a most beautiful quote a couple of days ago, and I thought I'd share it. It was by Teilhard de Chardin. He was saying that people whose intent and purpose is for the evolution of consciousness, not their personal consciousness, but just consciousness, they almost have a visceral or sensual attraction to other people that do the same thing. And it seems like these people, when they're on that track, their sole purpose or intent becomes to assist other people in making that shift in consciousness. So it kind of snowballs, whereas on the other side, it gets divided on helping each other to evolve consciousness universal consciousness, but personal consciousness kind of multiplies.
For a long time, I felt this relic worshiping and collecting relics and stashing everything away and not allowing us to really, you know, in the old days, I found out about Bob in '68 in Australia, actually. We saw everything in Bob's house and, you know, all of this. And so as we're getting further and further away from when he was in the body, these relics are being saved, you know, and things like that. And I was starting to have dreams about people gathering in places and sitting on the floor and all talking to one another. Baba would be sitting up in a chair and no one was paying any attention to him. He's here. He is physically here. You know, I mean, if Saint Bernadette and these kinds of saints can always stay, or, you know, some of the great masters, they stay here. Baba said he would stay here and not leave. What is it, 100 years or something like that? He is physically available to us. And I would have these dreams where I would look at Baba and think, everybody's just talking, they're gossiping about this and that, and they're not noticing. He's sitting there, he's alive, and he's sitting there, and he's just so bored because nobody's noticing he's sitting there, you know? And so one time when I had this dream, because I kept having a dream of this, and I said, you want to go for a walk? You know, so he goes, yeah. You know, so we went outside. This is dreams. I didn't see him in like what you did. Wow. But we went for a walk outside, and there was a beautiful rose bush, and it was full of roses. They were huge roses. And then there was all these bees all around the rose bush. They were just covering the rose bush. And then it started lightly, lightly raining, and so I had an umbrella, and we were walking, and I put it over Baba, and we were walking out into, and he was wearing that black jacket that he always used to wear for ages, you know, the one? I guess it's the one he always wore until it fell apart.
The Comley coat.
It was the black one. And so we were out in this little garden outside, and he looked in there, and he sort of sent me into the rose bush in a different dimension. He sent me deep into the wood of the rose bush, the tree. And he said, don't be the rose, don't be the bee, but be the root. Be the root. And for some reason, all this idea of him inside of each of us, like you said, he's inside of each of us. He's sending these guys over here from Australia, and they're bringing Baba here. He sends us over there. Wherever we're planted, it's like that we got him. He's in us. There's none of it in the relics. I mean, that's nice. It's us. We carry this treasure inside of us. And I always knew that we are the root. Anyway, that's all I have to say.
Beautiful.
I guess Baba made it that way that my life is very challenged. I have a special need daughter on autism spectrum, and I have a husband who's totally blind at this time. And in my household, sometimes things get very chaotic. Like my daughter gets tantrum, and basically things start falling out of the tables, and then basically everything, all the furniture is down on the ground, sometimes even the photo frames, everything comes. So, and then my husband is trying to kind of control the chaos, so he's also trying to help, but then he can't see. So then at that time, I'm trying to clear the path so he doesn't fall down and trip, and somehow to control my daughter at the same time. And it doesn't happen, I mean, it happens like maybe for a few minutes, like 5 minutes or so, like constant, when she has kind of anxiety, some kind of tantrum. So then one time, recently I asked Baba that, Baba, you told me to surrender to yourself, because he actually asked me in my dream that all your problem is because you haven't surrendered to me 100%. So that chaos was going on and everything was getting out of control. So I said, Baba, you have to come now from your divine, beyond the state of consciousness here and look into that and come and help, and I'm surrendering to you totally. So I'm just thinking, it's in my mind, I'm not even vocalizing it. I'm just asking Baba to come, and then suddenly my daughter comes, grabs my hand, and then pulls me to her room, and she sits down on the bed, and I sit down, and then she gives her hands to me. So I'm holding both hands, and then at that time, all I'm thinking is is thinking of Baba, feeding the mass and the mats, and washing the lepers, the feet, nurturing, caring like a mother. So I'm like just seeing all that happening, and my daughter is in the best behavior, starts to pose, and we had that like for 10-15 minutes. And that never happened before. So either she responded or Baba asked her to respond. So she calmed me down too. So she not only calmed down and like at the end like relaxed and smiling, happy, and I was like calmed down, like everything, like the storm, it's a storm, just suddenly just mellow down and quiet down. And it was, at the end, it was so blissful. And I knew that it was Baba who came and interfered and helped, because it was out of my ability. Thank you.
I told this to, old memory, to my friend who plays the harp. You all know her.
Judith Shotwell.
Judith. I told her this story because she was at that time living in Atlanta. And she said, the same thing happened to me. When she was living in Washington, D.C., she had been out somewhere and she came home. And just as she got to her house, somebody popped out of the bushes and held a knife right to her throat. And she just yelled, "Meher Baba." The guy dropped the knife and ran. So the power of his name is incredible.
Wow. Yeah. Yes. Wow. Right on.
In Los Angeles County, when I was working as a health inspector, I used to go and inspect apartment buildings, and I had a complaint. So I went on, knock on the door, and I went in, and there was this young man, a man comes in. And then suddenly, by looking at him, he says, "Oh, don't worry, I'm not going to rape you." And that was like a red flag. So I said, "Meh," in myself, "Meh Baba, Meh Baba, Meh." So I had to do the inspection because I have a duty. So the guy, there was something in that room or just by my side that the guy was a step that I would take in, he would take like 2-3 steps away from me. Yeah. And then it was as such that I was afraid that he's going to fall through the balcony. I mean, because he was just running away, shivering or something. And then I just quickly did, and then I had to go out. So that was definitely Baba presence.
The experiences that one has had over many years, since 1968 anyway. But on Baba's birthday, my best friend of me, Bob Underwood, and I went to Baba's house, the 5 o'clock, and it was very sweet and good. but I had a peculiar feeling in that while it was going on. I don't know what. It was a peculiar feeling. It wasn't a bad feeling. It was a peculiar feeling, like something's about to happen. So we get to my car, which is parked outside of the gate there. Not the gate, but the, anyway, right outside of Bob's house. And as I'm getting in, we both hear pop, crack, and it happened to be, I knew that my leg had fractured. Okay. So it was there on Baba's birthday right afterwards, and I thought, this is his doing, I guess, but I wasn't too happy. And so I drove, Bob, you know, I don't let Bob drive my car if I can help it. So I drove over to the hospital from Baba's house, and so forth and so on. So anyway, you know, of course, I discourage them from giving me any kind of medications or anything like that, because I know how I react. I might as well be. I want to be in some kind of mind. And so when I get home, I can't get into the bed. It's so painful, and it's high, and have to do things. And I got this contraction on my leg, and so I have to get the guys to put me in the bed. The guys are Bob Underwood, who sleeps on the couch. He paid for it. And then there's, I call him Brother Lawrence, Larry Matilla, rents a room. So they had to pick me up to put me in the bed for the next few weeks. And so it was very funny. It hurt, but it was funny. I could see the humor. Bob picked up my legs. Brother Lawrence picked me up from the back because he's stronger, I guess. And they had this mischievous look on their face. Like, we're going to pick her up and just, as though they were going to pick me up and just throw me out the window or something. You know? But they didn't, of course. But a mischievous look, it was so definite. So anyway, I really appreciated that. And I had a lot of problems with this contraction on my legs because it caught on everything. So the guys took turns to say, I'm going to be gone for about an hour or two. You going to be here? Yeah, I'm going to be here. So they took turns of being gone, because I was always getting caught on something. This thing was, never mind. It was something else. So I really appreciate that, that I had those two guys. Now, I didn't want a roommate, but if I was going to have one, I wanted a woman. Well, I won't go into all the reasons of whatever happened, but I wound up with two guys. And it might have been a blessing, probably, well, I know it was a blessing that I had two guys. And they're nice guys, you know, I don't have anything to worry about. But anyway, that was my more recent experiences. Okay, thank you.
Bernard met Baba in 1958 as well as 56,
then 58,
and then 58,
and 62.
Excellent, 3 times. So, and then has been on Avatar's boat ever since. So I'll let you tell the whole story. But just per your request and per their request, there will be some time for question and answer after the main talk is given. So, alrighty.
Thanks, Angela.
All set to go then?
And thank you all for the welcome. And thank you for the opportunity of being in the circle, and thank you people for sharing. That was very nice. Thank you. As Angela said, this continues on, but we'll just go back a little bit and a few little basics. Whereabouts in Australia we'll be talking about, and that is Brisbane here. Avatar's abode is 70 miles to the north of there. In 1956, Baba came to Sydney, then down to Melbourne, and in 1958 he came to Brisbane via Sydney, then up to Brisbane, 4 days at Avatar's abode, back to Brisbane, and then back down to Sydney to depart. He didn't meet with people in Sydney. I'll be talking about my parents, and that's my father and mother. And father, 4'8" high, he from an early age had very bad bouts of polio, years in hospital. Many of you know him indirectly in that he's got sculptures at Moorabad, that white one in the blue, at Morazad, that white one in the blue bus, and in Barbara's bedroom, a bronze one in the corner. That's my father's work, so many of you know him indirectly. Francis Brabazon, he left Australia, Barbara called him, and he left Australia beginning of 1959 with a return ticket. Barbara never said to go home, so he stayed. And one of the Mundley there serving Barbara.
Just mentioning here that John Bruford and Francis were really good friends dating right back to the 1930s when they both went to the Melbourne Art Galleries School. John as a student, Francis also as a student, but a model as well. So their friendship really dated way back.
Wow.
Now, yesterday I gave a talk and I read a letter and showed a slide, and I failed to acknowledge the Moorabad archives who had provided that material, the copy of the cable where Barbara had said to Francis, who had described the property before purchase, Barbara wrote back and said it was excellently suitable. That came from the archives, and it was wrong that I did not acknowledge that. Also, the letter that Francis wrote to Erich in October of 1957, what I would almost call pleading with Barbara about coming to Australia, where he says in that letter that I read that he'd prepare a place virtually anywhere at all, and even Queensland, and that is what Barbara did express a preference for. I thought it might be interesting, though, to something else that the archives provided was material from this time. In 1958, here in America and in Australia, he told all the Sahavas that he would be sending instructions towards the end of June or early July, and I found it fascinating to get a glimpse from the Indian archives how Erich would operate. He at that time had what the archives call Erich's Red Book, and in it is where Erich would write instructions from Barbara of taking notes of what he would have to be doing. And here's an example. I don't know if you can read that, but it says, copy of orders sent by aerogram to USA on the 21st, 22nd and 23rd of June, 58, and Australia on the 24th of June. So there was easy order, and one to repeat audibly 500 times a day at one sitting, any one time during the 24 hours, and saying, Beloved God, thy will has come to pass in that all our Barbara has declared will soon come to pass this year. And to secondly give up one cherished item, and for those 40 days. Then there's easy, or the diary goes into instructions for different people. The more difficult order was 1,500 times a day. I know the cherished item I gave up was butter. And another example of my just failing with the simple things is that I can still remember at school, for some reason, I went to school without a cut lunch that my mother used to do, and I bought a salad roll, and I was into the second bite before I remembered the butter, and I just felt absolutely terrible about that. And I didn't recount yesterday, in 1958, when Barbara was at Avatar's abode, he gave again a very simple instruction: do not leave the property. And some of us, after the evening meal, walking back to the tents where the men were lodging, and some had already retired for the night, so some of us with our kerosene lamp kept walking, and I'd taken one step off the property before I realised again I'd broken that very simple order, directive of Barbara, and it's not a nice feeling to know when you're failing on the very simple things. Robert and Lorna Rouse were one of the two families directed by Barbara to live on Avatar's abode. After 1958, the personal interviews, it was pretty sure that this would be the order that comes to the Bruford family and to the Rouse family. And so that's the picture of Robert and Lorna Rouse. They're both now deceased. And in terms of how, with these orders in Erich's Reed book, his diary, what he wrote about for Robert, Robert Rouse, Keel Mountain, actually Keel is misspelt there by Erich, but I don't know if you can read it or not. Woombai, Queensland, had come many days in advance to help Francis build Avatar's abode. He is now told to stay on the farm with his wife Lorna and child Ryder and do farming on a plot of land at Avatar's abode centre. Robert as one of the Mundley. So I thought that's not many people.
Wow.
I gather that Barbara said that too of Bill LePage, and at the same time he said that of Robert Rouse. Robert never used to talk about it. He said he didn't know what it meant. And Francis Brabazon's order, so this is an example of the care and attention Erich would be giving to the instructions that Barbara said, do this, do that, do the other. And so, be at Avatar's abode to instruct you further. You may go to places in Australia for Barbara's work. You may work on Avatar's abode centre and let the centre flourish. Continue to keep the estate standing in your name. It had been offered to Barbara and it was his, and Barbara gave it back to Francis, saying that he didn't own property. Let Robert Lorna Rouse, John and Joan Bruford do farming on separate plots, give each family a plot of land. Okay, I'm going to go on to the next one, which is again more for Francis, and stay at Avatar's abode for 40 days. On the 14th of July, do not go off the centre premises. You may freely move about the fields at the centre. You are permitted to speak, read or write, but not to me or Erich. For these 40 days, do not eat anything. But, okay, pretty tough instructions. On the right-hand side there, we'll definitely send you order in October as to whether to come to India. So that order did come, and as I mentioned, he bought a return ticket. Barbara never said to go home. So that was to give her an idea, which was new to me till the archives of Maribad sent it, of how an insight into Erich keeping track of the instructions Barbara told him to do. All right, now the Bruford family arrived at Avatar's abode at the end of the year. My father had come a few months early. Barbara had instructed that while the Bruford house was being built, that the Brufords and the Rouse family lived together in this 2.5 bedroom cottage, 8 people, and no electricity, limited water. A lot of that had to be carried. One outdoor toilet, which best in Australian language is called the dunny, just 4 sack walls to it with a roof over the top, and a can to be emptied periodically. And so Barbara had made it clear that Robert was in charge while Francis was away. Well, Francis was there for the first few weeks when I arrived. with mother and sister, father having been there a few months earlier.
The Bruford children finished the year at school. Frances had said that it was beneficial to carry out Barbara's orders as soon as possible, and suggested that, you know, that maybe that they just finish the school term. But John and Joan made the decision that Bernard and Joanna at least finish out the year of school. But John came up earlier. But Bernard only completed school to the end of year 10, and Joanna was able to finish till the end of year 12.
Right, so Robert dished out different jobs. You know, to dig a hole, to empty the toilet. We shared that job, but like, wood had to be cut for the fire because that's how we got hot water and did the cooking. And that was one job Robert had allocated to me. And then when we get some summer rain, a week of rain, and we run out of dry firewood, Robert got quite upset with me that, well, I should have catered for the rain. Like, I'm 15-year-old and knew nothing about farm life or anything at all. But it occurred to me later that Robert Rouse, his parent, only child, and about to go into business with it, or had started going into business with his father as a gem importer. Like, he's now abandoned the family.
Straight up from Sydney.
Straight up from Sydney. He, only a month or two earlier, was the apprentice to Frances Bruford on how to milk the cows, dig the holes for the toilet, etc., and how to chop wood. So it was, I won't say it was the blind leading the blind, but Robert hadn't had much experience either. And what is even, to me, more incredible is, looking back, as the years went by, I have zero recollection of ever thinking that this is a bit unreasonable, what we've been asked to do. Like, this is what we were doing, and it all just seemed to be part of the natural day. Like, it's hard to imagine that I have no recollection of ever thinking that Barbara's making it tough for us guys, not at all. Few family photos taken at these first few years. That dog Prince was an incredible dog. He rolled in the sun in front of Barbara, and he was accompanied me everywhere on the property, even if I was a quarter of a mile from home and then I was going to go off somewhere, whatever, I could send that dog home and he would go, and if my cat had come with the dog, they were inseparable. If I sent the dog home from, you know, a quarter of a mile away from home, the dog would go and the cat would follow. An incredible dog. Anyway, my father, and again in the vegetable garden where organic procedures were the rule. And Sister Joanna, she finished up doing horticulture in Sydney, and her house companion Cecily did a lot of work planting trees around Avatar's abode. A couple of family shots of my father. That, like, his left leg was a gammy leg, it hadn't grown. That device on the bottom of his shoe he called affectionately his scone cutter. And with the white cat I mentioned, playing musical instruments, he couldn't read music, but he could hear a tune once and then just play it.
Everything about John Bruford's interest is in that photograph. There's the Temple Bar cigarettes, the motoring magazines.
Yeah. Okay, so life farming for Robert and myself. Like, my father, he was the brains, I was the work. Father could make anything. He could make an orange grater, a cleaner, keep the machinery and apple pie working order. We planted beans and got some bad wash erosion, because we hadn't had the slope right. Okay, we needed a theodolite, going to buy one. No, you couldn't buy one in the district, but even if you could, it would cost hundreds, if not thousands of dollars. No, just a simple one, no such thing. In 2 hours he'd made one with water pipe and a bit of oil or something in a glass tube which he bent and a mirror at 45 degrees. It worked perfectly. We went home and made a theodolite, absolutely perfect for getting the slopes for drilling out beans and peas and things. Okay, so
we don't know what that word is. What's a theodolite?
Theodolite is what surveyors use to get levels, accurate levels over distances, with an eyepiece and usually someone there with a measuring stick somewhere else.
They call them a transit here. It's called a transit.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Sorry about that. For Avatar's abode, there was some rumours got started in those early years, in that we were the nudist colony. That was quite well known. I think Francis Bruford was the cause of that, in that we had no electricity on the property, and he was staying in the back of Barbara's house. This is before he went to India at the very beginning of 1959, and so had his cold water bath, and no one else on the property. Avatar's abode, the end of a dead-end road, and he'd just go out naked and have a cigarette in the sun. But he misjudged once with a vehicle coming, and he didn't know whether he had time to get back to the house or head for the bush. He headed for the bush. But that coincided with rumours that we were a nudist colony. Mother heard it on good authority, the hairdressers and the lady in the next door cubicle, do you call it, with hair dryers and things. But this Francis, the person in charge of the property, had gone to India to buy marble for a temple on the top. And the most incredible rumour was that we were transmitting messages to the Russian submarines. And my father was an electronics engineer in Melbourne, and cutting-edge design, and he wanted to build the Rolls-Royce of amplifiers. Sound reproduction was his thing, and he'd go and, like, he knew every shop in the area that sold radio parts, and he would order things that they'd never heard of, and tell them where you could buy these, and even the things they could, resistors that they had heard of. He'd say, no 10% allowance, it has to be within 2% or whatever, and he'd take his meter in and measure the accuracy of, and I think that's how the Russian submarine stories started. And that was substantiated by neighbours who were interviewed by the Australian equivalent of CIA or FBI or whatever you have over here. Okay. Life for Francis Bruford at Morazad, a lot of the 1960s has been written about, but Francis, with some of his letters, comes up with a slightly different flavour. I'd like to share just a paragraph out of a letter. I've just finished an enormous evening meal after one of our all-day fasts. No food, no tea, no water, no cigarettes. This occurs twice a week. So, twice a week, I am first starved and then stuffed. If I don't eat it all, the next morning Barbara wants to know why. Sometimes, as tonight, I might manage to tempt Erich. Half tempt, half plead, to relieve me of some of my bowls, so relieve me of some, so that bowls go back to the kitchen empty, and Barbara doesn't know. So a lot of the flavour of those 1960s, I know from the letters, that we have at Avatars Abode. The flavour of those years is yet to be written. I know that. That's an example.
These letters were written to the Avatar Abiders.
Barbara coined the term Avatar Abiders, which was the Rouse family and the Bruford family, and then later Barbara said, of course that includes May, and of course that includes the Shipway family. So that was during the 1960s. Yeah. I'll go into the East-West Gathering in 1962. When we went there, we learned from Francis that he did not think that he'd be coming back to Australia. I was very impressed when, as this photo shows, how a little chink of sunlight comes through the ceiling, the awning, the cloth awning, the panda. And this little bead of sunlight comes and shining on Barbara's head. Within seconds, must have happened before, because someone was prepared. There's someone with an umbrella to immediately shield Barbara with that little chink of sunlight, and you can see that chink on the umbrella. I was very impressed that, like, I'm 19 years of age and don't know much about serving God, but you know, even the smallest little thing they were prepared for. The Australians going over, we went by ship to Colombo in '62 with the plane, or most of us, not all of us, and at Colombo we were going to fly to Bombay, but there was a war on with China, and the Indian government pulled in all the Indian airline flights, so we had to stay. There were 6 seats available, and it was Robert Rouse, I think Bill LePage, I'm not sure.
6 seats available.
On a plane, yeah. And so those who hadn't met Barbara decided, let them go now, get the full time at the East-West Gathering. Others stayed on the ship, and so arrived late. This shows arriving late. Barbara stopped the program on the second day. That's Bill LePage here, Joan LePage, Jenny LePage, now Jenny Keating. That's Ruth, now Marie LePage. May Lundquist, for those who know the name. So Barbara stopped the program. It's a nice photo. This is one I took of the farewell at the Bun Gardens after it was over. Another photo I took at that time, which there are some photos taken on 1969 at the end of January, early February of the crypt, and that's how it was in 1962 with the floral painting by name, I forgot, Helen Dunn. Same as the walls today, that extended down into the crypt. So that's a photo perhaps quite a few of you mightn't have seen. One thing rather amusing bit of major concern at the time on the ship going over, the ship had a daily newspaper page printed on the ship, just one page, and 3 news items this day for all the ship's crew and passengers. One was the Cuban Missile Crisis, 2, the Indo-Chinese War, 3, bushfires, Keel Mountain, Woombye, Queensland, Australia. And in that context, that was rather scary. I know it was Robert Rouse who found out it was the radio operator who had put the newspaper together. He had heard that there were quite a few people from Woombye on the ship and put it in as an interest item. But we didn't know how serious it was, not for weeks later. But no houses burned, and it wasn't close to Avatars Abode. In terms of Francis with Barbara in those 1960s, I used to write to Francis. He encouraged it. He used to say it was only my letters that actually told him what was going on. And I'll share one letter with you. I'd said this was the first coffee table book of Australia with colour photos, beautifully prepared, and I sent a copy to Francis, and I'll read it. My dear Bernard, how thoughtful of you to send me such a beautiful present as the Australians. and how fortunate for everyone, for all Australia, that you thought of it. For beloved Barbara, for 3 mornings, in the side it says, it's only 4 days ago he received it. Barbara, for 3 mornings, has had me read portions of it to him and has looked at all the photos. This means that you all have been instrumental in reminding him about Australia, and all of you for all that time. So, taste of Francis's thinking. He liked Barbara to hear more about Australia. I know he had a little game going with Barbara about the 3/4 of the world will be destroyed. And Francis put in a personal request at this time, with these fun and games between Francis and Barbara, a personal request that when the upheaval comes, like a mountain range in the middle of Australia, snow-capped, to feed the rivers with water, and there's a lot of correspondence on this fun game at
the geography of Australia is a little unfortunate because the only major mountain range is sort of close to the east coast. That's one of the reasons why Australia is such a dry continent. So Francis thought that Barbara could have organised that a bit better.
My father, he had a coronary a month or so before the East-West gathering, and so he could not make the trip. And Barbara, actually, during the East-West gathering, sent him a cable saying, "I am with you there." And a month or so later, someone said to my father how unfortunate it was for him that he'd missed out on the East-West gathering. My father's response to that person was, "No, that's not how it was at all." And he said, "I didn't miss out. Barbara came to me here." Yeah. Now, I said I sent a lot of letters to Francis. He encouraged my writing. But early in the piece, one letter I wrote, Francis got quite upset with me, and I just believe Francis must have misread what I'd written, but I'd never know. But I was determined that would never happen again, and so I bought a carbon book and kept then a copy of a letter I wrote Francis, which is now great because I've got my version of events all through the 60s. But Francis was my godfather. My father met Francis in the 1930s at art school in Melbourne, and I was named after Francis, Bernard Francis Bruford. And I was determined Francis wasn't going to get this wrong anymore. So I'd write letters, and with my father wanting to do organic farming, and I'd put in the work, and the beans were growing beautifully, except at the last moment they'd get bean fly or something, and instead of buying the chemicals that every other bean grower would use to save the crop and get a return, nothing would happen. So although we had successes, we also had a lot of failures and a lot of disagreements about how to farm. Both Robert Rouse and myself, necessity, went and worked for other farmers to get income. That had the advantage of learning a bit about farming from people who knew. But there was a lot of tough times there. And actually Barbara did give instructions to both Robert and my father to do something different. In my father's case, Barbara said to make art his full-time work. Anyway, with my letters, where I did, it was 1965, 2 of my letters were very long, and with the second one of these, Francis describes how he just read it and called into Mundley Hall at Morazad. And Barbara says to Francis, "Have you heard from any of the Australians lately?" "Yes, a letter from Bernard." "Read it to me." Right, so those of us gathered here today, I think, believe mostly that Barbara knows everything. Now, if you're going to write a letter to someone, you'd word it perhaps a little differently if you thought it was all going to be read to Barbara, but even though he knows everything anyway. But anyway, as a result of this Francis describes how he spent 20 minutes reading this letter to Barbara. That's the second long one of 1965. I then got a cable from Barbara to say to get myself qualified in a profession of my choice, and he would help me. And yes, he did help me. It came pretty quickly. I think I became the first person ever to talk their way into entering the University of Queensland without having met all the prerequisite requirements. That help extended into 1969, coming to the Great Darshan, where there was one exam I just had to do to continue the course. And I talked the university into giving it to me a week early. I've never, and sworn to secrecy. Yes, I did get some help. In my university, and I decided on education, and this first school I was appointed to is where we met. And one thing I'll share is that Joanne, who describes herself as an agnostic Catholic, but not a Barber lover. She knows more about Mayor Barber than many of the Mayor Barber family, but that's another story. But the relationship was such that it was beginning to grow, and I went, Francis is now back in Australia, and I went and discussed with him this idea of a Barber lover and a non-Barber lover forming a relationship. And I went and talked it all over with him, and after he listened to me for quite some time, Francis's response was, look, more or less, I'll talk now. He says it's so simple. He says, two people, they've both got their values of what is important. They've both got their concept of what is right and what is wrong. They've got their goals of what they want to achieve. And Francis said, the only thing that counts is will each of those two people be able to help the other towards what is important to them. And that for me just made it so simple. Yes, we've got the same values, right and wrong, and it's worked for 48 years so far.
I think over 48 years we have been able to achieve our goals.
Yeah, Myrtle Beach has been on my wish list for a long, long time, and yes, Joanne's making it a lot easier for me to try and share with you. So went to, as far as the wedding being planned, Francis in his gruffy way said, suppose I'll have to get you a wedding present, what would you like? And I said to Joanne, don't answer now, I want to discuss it. Yeah. We discussed it. We said to Francis, Joanne accepted my idea, we'd like a song for our wedding. And, says Francis. Anyway, a week or two before the wedding, Francis just casually asks me, is so-and-so coming to the wedding? Yes. So-and-so? Yes. No. No. No.
I wanted the wedding to be very small.
So Francis is, in response to who's are they coming, there's all these no's with a few yeses in what he asks. And he says, well, you'll have to invite them. I said, no. And he said, yes. You asked for a song for your wedding. I have to have singers. They've been practicing for weeks. So, anyway, it was the first, what he wrote, there's some beautiful lines. First thing he ever wrote to Beethoven's Ode to Joy from the 9th. And down the bottom, stanza 3, I can't sing, but I'll just read stanza 3. So this is all the singers who stand up at this outdoor wedding and sing facing Joanne and I. Our eyes shine with love reflected from the love within your eyes. Love which is of itself certain, but is its own glad surprise. So that's the third stanza, but it's a beautiful piece. And that's a picture of Francis, Joanne and I on our wedding day. And before we open it up to questions or comments or whatever, there's one thing I do please want to share with you all. And I sometimes say to people, this is really the only thing that I can say that's really worthwhile. And that is, I'm very conscious of how I met the physical form of Barbara, 1956, 58, 62. And I don't know how I would feel if I was one of those ones who missed out by just a month, a year, or only 5 years, or only 10 or 20 years. I don't know how I'd handle that. So I can't put myself in a position of those who didn't meet his physical form. But I can say that for me, the most significant meeting, with most memorable, the one that's lasted with me longer than the physical meetings, was bowing down to that supposedly empty chair at the 1969 Great Darshan. That was brought in emotions and a relationship different to what I'd had with the physical form. And as was said, as we were gathered in that circle very eloquently now back, how is that Barbara is within each of us. We just have to, the challenge is with me, to have that intimacy with him again that I've experienced several times. I know the ball is in my court. That thing called the I has to just be got rid of. And Barbara's there for us all the time. And we've all got to challenge. That to me is my challenge, to try and get rid of the I, to share that companionship. I have that conviction he is there all the time. But we blind ourselves because of being caught up in our own little worlds. So with that philosophical word of wisdom, please, I'd love to try and answer any questions that some of you might like to pose.
I did want to ask about Eric's red book.
Yeah.
Is it just one book, or is it from 1 year, that red book, or what's the...
I only know what the archives provided, the archives in Australia, and
in Australia?
yeah, but the fact that there's so many pages devoted to 1958, I suspect that there's many red books. Some of them might be different colours, but the one which was in operation in at that time was a red book, and that's how the archives in Maribad refer to it. That's all I can answer. I suspect so. Yes, Judy.
Could you share with us a bit more about the 69 Darshan and your own experience of bowing down at the not empty chair?
One thing which doesn't answer your question but comes to mind is how someone who went there at 69, I can't remember who, when at the Samadhi, where Barbara's physical body was now interred, how they didn't feel Barbara's presence there at all, to which Francis just replied immediately, well, of course not. He invited you to Pune to have his Sahavas there. That's where Barbara was at that time. I know that's not your question. I have, and I can't explain it, so few memories of 1969. I can't, bowing down to that chair, my attitude was, well, when in Rome, do as the Romans, yes. That's what they do in India, bow down to chairs. I'll go along with that too. I never expected any reaction whatsoever. I had noticed that some people were affected, which I don't know if that was because of the occasion in the room, or I hadn't associated with this is what happens when you bow to the chair. It got me completely by surprise. And I think there's a whole book of similar stories with other people. Barbara was there. He honoured the invitation to share his company in Poonatown. Sorry, I can't enlarge. Yes, I've got memories of meeting Mundley and...
But can you mentioned just before that it was different for you in '69 at Darshan than actually being so-called with Baba in human form, in physical
62.
form. Can you say what that difference is?
No. I can use words. It was more meaningful, more intimate, more significant, the experiences lasted longer, it's more enduring in my memory. That sensation is enduring as opposed to being with him physically. I'm sorry, I'm not eloquent enough with the English language to convey, but different and, and for me, more meaningful. But I have since actually '69 again been fortunate to experience that intimacy, which I think is the best word to describe it. But as I said, the only formula I know is to somehow get rid of the I.
So you're saying that in your experience, it was more intimate after he left the body than before.
That is what I'm saying, yes. For me.
I believe that's what Erich said, that the way they related to Baba when he was in the body was very different from those who had never met him.
One of Mundley said, I might be getting the emphasis a bit wrong here, but the gist of it was, one of the Mundley, one of the women, is how fortunate are those who did not meet Barbara in the physical form, in that they are the ones who can have that real yearning for union with God, for intimacy with him, which is perhaps, this Mundley member suggested, be more difficult if you're just attached with memories of his physical form. It could, for those who didn't meet Barbara, that perhaps be easier for them to have a stronger yearning for the important aspect of the relationship. I'm sorry, I'm not good with words.
You're doing great.
So yes, it was...
It's the first time I've ever had anyone clarify that, ever, in 51 years.
Well, I can only give it from my point of view, in that I do, having met his physical form, I think I said this somewhere in one of the talks on the centre, it might have been somewhere, what doesn't come out, like in the film, a lot of Barbara's beauty comes out, the majestic way he'd walk, his hand gestures, a lot of beautiful stuff comes out, but I'll just spend a few minutes trying to share what, to me, does not come out in the films. And one is how I don't believe that anyone in a group like this before Barbara would not very, very quickly after the meeting starts, I doubt if there'd be anyone there who doesn't feel and know that Barbara knows they're there and that they're part of the group. He could get that intimacy. I've talked about this with others who've been in the company of his physical form, that immediately you felt that Barbara knew you were there, that I was there, and he had noticed that I was there. And it was always, with Barbara, doesn't come out perhaps in the films, but it's always a very natural thing, as if no big deal, it's just family get together, no tensions, just a loving family get together. Perhaps, I haven't described that perhaps very well, but all natural, no, you know, I wonder if I'll get on with this person, or wonder what it's going to be like. It's always natural, as if it was meant to be that way. me, the very significant part of being with Barbara was Erich speaking, and I don't think the literature clarifies, to the extent it could, how much Barbara, as Erich would be talking Barbara's words, that Barbara would, with absolutely perfection, with timing, be in tune with Erich's words. Sorry, I didn't say that well. Erich's words would be mirrored by Barbara's body language. The facial expression, the hand gestures, absolutely synced to the words as Erich spoke them. And this is, I think, why many people say that they didn't notice Erich. Like, Erich was just a voice, and that's all. He wasn't the one gesticulating, saying the words with expressions on his face. That's what Barbara was doing. So it was, as you spoke with Barbara, with Erich being the voice, it was, you were speaking with Barbara. It was, the words as Erich spoke them was what Barbara was signifying with his hands and expression on his face. That doesn't, I think, come out in the literature or the films.
Is that maybe a little chicken and the egg? I mean, I always thought that Erich was so good at putting into words what Barbara was gesturing.
Yes. Well, what comes first is Erich has to get to Erich what he wants to say. Sorry. Barbara has to get to Erich what Barbara wants Erich to say. So Barbara is actually talking twice. First he talks to Erich, which happened, I don't know if it's 2, 5, 10, 15 seconds early, I don't know. But then Barbara has to say the same thing a second time with the body language as Erich speaks it. So, yes, Erich, there's accounts of him saying he'd learn whether Barbara would want him to be sterner with his voice or etc. And Erich was very sensitive to his voice echoing the mood. Erich has spoken about that. But with that happening, Barbara's synchronisation was always perfect. There is I think up the back and then here, I think, well, no, here now first. Yeah, yes.
What my mind came up with was it sounds like Barbara was using the thought transmission that he used with Narina, with Erich.
Well, could be. I've learned not to underestimate the Mandali. They're in a league of their own.
Okay.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Yes, Cheryl.
I wanted to know if you were one of the 3 running away from Baba John.
No, I was not. Look, I have, on the 2 talks I gave in the centre, I shared some photos. Some are ones which have never been seen in America before, and I thought it might be nice to share it with those who weren't at those talks, and I don't think those who have seen them over at the centre would mind seeing them again. So, sorry. Oh, that's Barbara's house in the meeting hall. It's not where I meant to start, I'm sorry. Sorry. Okay, Barbara at the tents at Avatar's abode. It was wet. The coat, I think, had been given to him here in America.
We were told that it was Elizabeth who gave him this coat just before he left.
Barbara went through the tents, which is where the men stayed. These are just quickly a few photos of Barbara. Some of them have been published. People like Tony Zoyce knows how to find anything on the internet. If you ever want help in finding anything, where's Tony? Hi, Tony.
Tony?
Those photos were taken mainly by Colin Adams and myself. And the ones I particularly wanted to show you have just gone on holidays. Here they come. So these 8 photos, Erich describes, this is the barber they so often, most of the time, were sharing the company of his presence in this kind of more serious mood. Erich said how pleased he was. He encouraged Colin Adams and myself to take these photos. Two of these are in Lord Mayor. These last 5 are taken by Colin. I think that one's in Lord Mayor. I'm not sure, but 2 of those are. It's a photo of Barbara leaving Avatar's abode, and with... You want me to end there?
Finish your sentence.
Okay. So...
That's your father driving the car.
That's my father driving the car, yeah.
You good? You finish your
Yep.
sentence?
We've got some lovely music to listen to.
Yes. Sorry, I'm just going to follow this mic.
So I just wanted to present the thank you card to Bernard. The group colored it. And if you didn't get a chance to sign it, come on up afterwards. But thank you to Bernard and Joanne for coming and speaking with us.
Thank you all.
Yes,
Thank
please
you, Angela.